All right, so picture this.
You're relaxing at home, maybe making dinner,
Okay.
and your phone starts buzzing. It's that friend of yours, the one who's always got some landlord drama going on.
Right.
And this time...
They're freaking out.
Oh, no.
You just got hit with an eviction notice.
Oh, man.
Eviction. That word sends chills down your spine, right?
Sure.
Makes you think, what can they even do? What are their rights in this whole mess?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's exactly what we're diving deep into today.
Okay.
Eviction defense in California.
And let me tell you, you've come to the right place.
Because California, it's like famous for having some of the strongest tenant protections in the whole country.
That's what I've heard.
Oh, yeah.
And we've got a mountain of articles here.
Legal stuff, real-life stories, even expert advice.
Okay.
All about breaking down this whole eviction process.
So whether you're the one facing eviction or you're a landlord who needs to, brush up on the rules, we've got you covered.
I think what's wild is just how much people get wrong about evictions.
Oh, tell me about it.
They hear eviction and think, simple, straightforward, done.
Right, like it's nothing.
But here in California, it's anything but.
Oh, absolutely.
There's so many twists and turns.
It's true. Even something as basic as, why a landlord can even evict someone.
Exactly.
It can get surprisingly complicated.
It's not always cut and dry.
Did you know that in California you have to have a just cause to evict someone?
Right, it's the law.
A landlord can't just decide to kick someone out because they, feel like it.
No way, no how.
And get this.
That just cause rule. It even applies if you're on a month-to-month agreement.
Which is something a lot of people don't realize.
I know, they think month-to-month means less protection.
Nope, not in California.
And that's what I find so interesting about California.
What's that?
They really try to make sure everyone gets a fair shake.
Yeah.
Even when it comes to something like renting.
It's about balance.
Exactly.
Think about it, a month-to-month agreement.
It's like a safety net, Less formal, for sure.
Right.
But it still means you're a legal tenant under California law.
Which means landlords have to follow specific rules.
Got it.
Like giving proper notice.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
No more this get out tomorrow
Yeah.
nonsense.
Nope. California's got timelines, very specific timelines laid out in the law.
Okay, so what are we talking about here?
Well, let's say you've been in your place for, say, less than a year.
Okay.
Even on a month-to-month, the landlord generally has to give you a 30-day notice.
30 days.
At least.
Okay.
And if you've lived there for a year or more?
That jumps to 60 days.
Wow, 60 days.
It's not as easy as some people think.
No kidding. It's not just a matter of handing someone a notice and saying, see ya.
Exactly. And ignoring these rules.
It can come back to bite landlords. Big time.
So all of this is super interesting.
But it kind of makes me wonder, if a landlord does want to go the legal route with an eviction,
Yeah.
how does that even work?
We keep seeing this term in the articles, unlawful detainer. What's that all about?
Unlawful detainer.
Is that just a fancy legal term for eviction or what?
You got it. Basically, legal jargon for eviction here in California.
Okay.
It's the official lawsuit a landlord has to file to legally remove a tenant.
So there's an actual lawsuit?
Oh, yeah, it's serious business.
So it's not like they can just, change the locks and hope for the best?
Nope, not a chance.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point of understanding this unlawful detainer thing.
It means this isn't some DIY project for landlords.
Right.
There's a very specific legal process they have to follow.
We're not just talking about signing a form or two.
No, sir.
We're talking about, going to court. Right.
Yes.
And official notices.
Absolutely.
And probably a whole lot of legal back and forth.
Can get pretty complex.
This unlawful detainer process sounds kind of intense.
It can be.
So walk me through it.
What are the key steps?
Well, it all starts with the details.
Okay.
Like in that Orange County unlawful detainer article.
They lay out a super clear step-by-step from serving those notices and filing the right paperwork.
Cool, okay.
All the way to potential court hearings.
And something called a writ of possession.
Writ of possession. That sounds a little scary, not gonna lie.
Yeah, it's not something you want to hear.
So is that the final nail in the coffin, eviction-wise?
It's more like, think of it as the key that unlocks the door.
How so?
So if a landlord wins their unlawful detainer lawsuit.
The court, they issue this writ of possession.
And what does that do?
It gives the sheriff the green light to legally remove a tenant.
Oh, wow. So it's like the final word.
It's how the court's decision actually gets enforced.
So this whole process, this unlawful detainer thing, it's serious business.
It really is. There are real consequences.
It's not just a landlord saying, I want you out, and that's it, huh?
Nope. not at all. And that actually brings us to something really important.
What's that?
Tenants, they actually have more power in this process than they might think.
Wait, really?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like most people think once that eviction notice shows up, they're basically doomed.
I get that, but it's not always the case.
So what are you saying? What can tenants do?
Think of it this way.
Because the eviction process, it's so strict, so clearly defined.
Right.
Any mistake the landlord makes, even a tiny one, it could be a way for the tenant to fight back.
No way. Really?
Yeah, like that article we have, Fighting an Unlawful Detainer Lawsuit in Orange County.
It talks about how if a landlord messes up the notice or tries to evict someone for a reason that's not even, like, legally allowed.
So it's not just about whether a tenant broke the lease or not.
Exactly. It goes way beyond that.
Wild. Okay, so give me an example.
Let's say a tenant, they ask for repairs, like their sink is leaking or something.
Okay.
And then, boom, eviction notice.
So if I report a leaky faucet, suddenly my landlord can evict me.
Well, not so fast.
That could be seen as retaliation, which is a big no-no in California.
Retaliation? Like the landlord's getting back at me for speaking up?
Exactly. California law, it protects tenants who are just exercising their rights.
Right, which everyone's entitled to.
And requesting repairs, complaining about unsafe conditions, even joining a tenants union.
Those are all protected activities.
So if the landlord tries to evict you after something like that...
They're playing with fire, legally speaking.
This is where things get really interesting, right?
How so?
Because it's not just about the law anymore. It's about power, like who has it and how they use it.
You're right. It's about fairness.
And speaking of fairness...
We can't forget about the whole COVID-19 situation.
Oh, man. COVID definitely threw a wrench in everything.
It feels like we're still dealing with the fallout from that.
Absolutely. It had a massive impact on housing.
I mean, we saw it all, right? Eviction moratoriums, rent freezes.
Yeah, a whole bunch of emergency measures.
It was kind of hard to keep up, honestly. Where do things stand now? Are those protections still in place?
It's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest.
How so?
Some of those protections, they've expired.
Makes sense.
But others, they've become like permanent parts of tenant law.
Wow, so COVID really did change the game in some ways.
It really did, and it varies depending on where you are in California.
Okay, that makes sense. So what should people be aware of?
Well, some cities, they still have their own local eviction moratoriums or rent control measures.
So it's not just about what the state says.
Exactly. You got to know what's going on in your specific city or county.
So staying informed is super important. But even with all these protections, I imagine going through an eviction, even if you have a good defense, it must be so stressful, so costly.
It can be incredibly daunting.
Especially when you factor in legal fees and all that.
You've hit upon a major hurdle for many tenants.
Which is?
Getting access to good legal representation.
That makes sense.
One of the articles, it's called Do You Need a Lawyer? And it really dives into this whole issue.
So is it essential to have a lawyer in these situations?
It can make a huge difference. But historically, legal help.
Yeah.
It's been a luxury most renters just couldn't afford.
Right. Lawyers aren't cheap.
And COVID, it really shone a light on this problem.
And how are things different now?
Well, there's this growing movement now for something called right to counsel laws.
Right to counsel. I've heard of that in, like, criminal cases, right?
Exactly. So this would basically guarantee a lawyer for any tenant facing eviction.
No matter how much money they make.
Exactly. And some cities in California, they're already trying it out with pilot programs.
So you're saying we might see a day where having a lawyer in housing court is just as common as in criminal court?
That's the goal. It's about leveling the playing field, recognizing that eviction law, it's complicated stuff.
It can feel like a whole other language.
Right. And even if right to counsel isn't everywhere yet.
There's been a big push to get more funding for legal aid organizations.
So there's more help out there now.
Definitely. And these groups, they offer free or low-cost legal assistance.
It's great to hear that there's more support available.
It's a step in the right direction, for sure.
I'm glad to hear there's more support out there now, because even if you have legal help,
right,
even if you win your case,
just going through that whole eviction process.
Oh, absolutely.
It's got to have some lasting consequences, right?
It can really impact a person's life on so many levels.
Like what? What kind of impact are we talking?
Think about it. It can affect your credit score.
Oh, or
makes it harder to rent again in the future. Even some jobs can be affected.
It's like that eviction follows you around, makes it so much harder to get back on your feet.
You get it. And you mentioned credit scores, right?
Yeah.
An eviction. That can stay on your record for years.
No way, really?
Oh, yeah, and that can make it a nightmare to secure loans, rent a new place. It's a ripple effect.
Wow, so we're not even just talking about the stress of almost losing your home.
It's the long-term stuff, too.
Exactly. Which is why, whenever possible, it's so important to try and avoid getting to that point.
You're talking about those win-win solutions we mentioned before.
Exactly. A lot of these articles, they really stress that open communication early on, it can prevent things from escalating to eviction in the first place.
So like landlords and tenants actually talking to each other.
You could, like, let's say a tenant loses their job out of the blue and they know they can't make rent.
Oh, that's a tough situation.
Or maybe there's just been some confusion about the lease agreement, something like that.
Okay, I can see that happening.
By being upfront, having that honest conversation,
you can often find a solution that works for everyone.
So instead of just freaking out, the tenant could say, hey, I'm having some trouble. Can we work something out?
Exactly. Like set up a payment plan.
Right, yeah.
Or clarify those lease terms before things get out of hand.
And there are resources to help with that kind of communication, right? Like that mediation we talked about earlier.
Mediation can be a game changer.
How so?
It's like having a neutral party there, someone who can help both sides find some common ground.
It sounds a lot less intimidating than going to court.
Way less formal, less adversarial. It's just about finding a solution that works.
I like it. But even with all this talk about communication and finding common ground,
it feels like we also need to address the bigger picture, you know?
What do you mean?
I mean, California's housing crisis, it's no secret, right?
Definitely not.
Rents are skyrocketing, affordable options are scarce. How does that impact all of this?
It plays a huge role. A lot of the articles, they talk about how the housing crisis just exacerbates the eviction problem.
Because if you do get evicted in this market, it's not like you have a ton of other options, right?
Exactly. Finding an affordable place is already like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
So it's this perfect storm, you're struggling, you face eviction, and suddenly you're really stuck.
Which is why it's so crucial to support the organizations fighting for change, you know, pushing for more affordable housing.
Right, like those tenants' rights groups we keep mentioning.
Exactly. They're the ones fighting for things like rent control, advocating for policies that create a more equitable housing system overall.
So it's about more than just helping individuals navigate this whole eviction process?
It's about changing the system itself.
You got it.
Wow. Well said. This has been a really insightful deep dive, to say the least.
I agree. It's been great unpacking all of this with you.
We've covered so much, from the ins and outs of Unlawful Detainer to those real-life stories that just stay with you.
And the need for broader change, we can't forget that.
Absolutely. And hopefully our listeners feel a bit more empowered.
That's the goal.
Like they have a better understanding of their rights, whether they're a landlord or a tenant.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. And speaking of knowledge, we'll be sure to include links to all those resources we talked about in the show notes.
The legal aid organizations, the tenants' rights groups, all that good stuff.
So if you're dealing with any of this, don't hesitate to reach out. You don't have to go through it alone.
And if you're in a position to do so, think about supporting those organizations fighting for change.
Even a small donation can go a long way.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive.
It's been real. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure was all mine. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Call now, 714-442-9741. Thank you.